Professor Edward Altman joining us now. He's Professor of Finance at the Stern School of Business and creator of the Z-Score and co-founder of Wiser Funding. Professor Altman, thanks so much for joining us. Now, especially at a time when there have been so many predictions going around in terms of how deep this crisis is going to go, what kind of recession we're in for, how different is it from the global financial crisis that you had predicted as well? And how are you assessing the situation, the global economy, and really the point at which it's at right now?
Well, there's no question that the global economy is in now a financial crisis, perhaps unprecedented in its type, quite different than the one in 2008-09. And of course, the extent of this crisis and how long it will last is very much related to the virus and its continued devastation to the global economy. And the early indications are that in terms of bankruptcies, defaults, credit issues, that this year will be perhaps a record-breaking one in terms of bankruptcies. Perhaps not, but it's not clear with respect to defaults of companies. Now, my perspective is mainly the United States, where we have the most data. But of course, I'm quite familiar with the situation in India as well.
Okay, well, talking about bankruptcies, if we first take a look at the US, and there, of course, we've seen the retail sector being hit the hardest with the likes of Neiman Marcus, JCPenney, and a whole lot more. Warren Buffett has also been, of course, dumping aviation stocks, and how we've seen how deep that goes as well in terms of the pain for the sector. So, what's the scope there? Like, which are the sectors you feel are going to be the most badly hit, the ones that are going to feel the most pain?
So far already, by the way, we've had more than 60 large corporate bankruptcies in the US since March. That's a record in terms of a short-term issue. And if you project that for the rest of the year, we will be the second largest year in terms of bankruptcies, above $100 million in assets and liabilities. The sectors, as you asked, that have been hit hard, of course, are retail, but it goes far beyond retail. Energy is still a very important, problematic sector in the United States in particular, because of all the shale oil productions that mainly were financed by debt. They were ripe fruit for a long time and have been fired. Then you have the leisure, hospitality, real estate areas, and you have transportation. Already some airlines, which, by the way, have a great history in bankruptcies and restructurings, coming back much stronger. So they're in much better shape, but now they are ailing again dramatically. And they needed somewhat of a bailout by the government already, and that's going to have to continue. Otherwise, we're going to see airline bankruptcies as well. We're already seeing some outside the United States because it's a global problem, and probably one for India as well. I don't know quite the makeup of the Indian airline industry, but my guess is they're going to suffer quite a bit, as well as the rest of the world. And so those sectors, but it's going to be beyond that. Rental car companies, Hertz is on the verge of perhaps a bankruptcy filing, and they're not the only one in that sector.
Right. Professor Altman, since you did talk about the high debt scenario, just wanted to understand as to how the dynamics are going to play out from here.
Well, that's a great question, and one that I must say most forecasters, whether it be for the economy or in my case for the credit industry, are scratching their heads saying, we've never seen so much uncertainty with respect to our models. My model for predicting default rates in the high yield bond sector, which is an area that I concentrate on, the so-called non-investment grade, is for a default rate this year of about 8 to 9%. Now, the historic average is around 3% per year. So you're talking about 3 times the historic average, but not as much as it was in 2009 and 2002 when it was close to 12%. Now, the key question is what will happen in 2021? And most forecasters are thinking cumulatively it could be more than 20% over 2 years. Now, it all depends on the GDP and the real economy, even though the stock market seems to be shrugging off this potential long-term downturn in the economy. And that's a great paradox we have now, the disconnect between financial markets, stock markets, even high-yield bond markets, and the real economy. But the question that you asked to focus on it, how bad will it be? Well, I'm thinking that the bankruptcy courts are going to be overwhelmed with activity in the next 15 to 20 months, and may itself need some support from the government. I'm on a commission of ad hoc academics, so to speak, looking at the bankruptcy system in the United States, and thinking that although it's probably the most advanced system in the world, we could be overwhelmed by not only the large companies, which I'm sure we see, and maybe we should also talk about small and medium-sized firms, which is particularly critical for the Indian economy. How many of those are going to fail and already have in large numbers? So that's the scenario that is quite concerning.
In India, just wanted to understand, because what we're seeing play out is sheer equity market underperformance as opposed to what's happening in the developed markets. How is it that you're seeing interest from foreign investors for distressed Indian companies?
I can tell you there was a huge interest in foreign investors in dealing with or investing in India ever since the new bankruptcy code, your new bankruptcy code, was introduced a few years ago, and had some initial success in the restructuring of major companies. And so what they did, and what they still want to do, is provide capital in distressed situations, probably at very high potential rates of return, and applying what we've learned quite a bit in the United States about distressed investing. So if you can buy, first of all, if you can lend to a company that is in distress, you have this potential. You have the potential that the company will recover, turn around, and your loan, which perhaps you lent at the equivalent of 70 cents or 60 cents on the dollar, goes back to par. And you get the coupon plus the capital appreciation. But if it doesn't, and in fact the company has to go bankrupt, but now can reorganize under your restructuring system, which I think is a big step upward, by the way, in your country as well as several other countries, then you can even be in a position to.
As we all have also been talking a lot about the disconnect between the financial and the real economy. What's your forecast then as you look ahead, Professor Altman, over the next 6 months or 1 year?
I'm not sure I'm the right one to ask that question. You look at my stock portfolio and you kind of scratch your head and you say, do you really think you know much about the markets? Because frankly, the stock market is a very difficult thing to be a continuously successful analyst and investor. But this is really, I've never seen such a disconnect before, where companies' reported earnings are really horrendous, and they're going to get worse rather than better. So the outlook is not good. Also, certain industries will never recover. Everything, in many cases, will change. Retail is certainly one that we have to be careful of, whether or not the old model, the bricks and mortar, the shopping malls, et cetera, are going to be there in the future. The energy industry is one that probably needs a restructuring quite a bit. The price of oil, of course, is the key. Then there's transportation. People maybe are not going to be using cars as much as they used to. They use other means. They use cars, but not their own.
And are there any sectors with a Z-score above 3 that you feel will be more resilient to this crisis?
I used to say healthcare, but I am concerned about healthcare now in the United States. I'm not sure what's going on in your country, but I'm really concerned with the large hospital system, and we have a lot of private hospitals in the U.S. as well as public ones, where they've had to shift to dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, and they cannot do their more profitable, let's just say, selective surgeries, orthopedics, etc. And my brother, who's an expert on healthcare, is very concerned. I'm more vicariously interested in healthcare. So that's one area that I would have thought would be resilient, because people always need healthcare, and they will in the future, but the amount they're losing. Another area is education. Now, this is an area I know very well. I can tell you, the university system in the United States is in great jeopardy. For one thing, we rely on lots of great students from India, and they're not going to be coming, either for immigration problems or healthcare issues, traveling on airplanes. Parents are going to stay closer to home. And so we're, it's a micro situation, but there are a huge number of universities out there that are going to be in tough shape. That means they have to sell their endowments in some cases. That means there's a downward impact on the markets. And so that's one industry that I thought was going to be resilient. But in this COVID-19 situation, the impact on new students is going to be significant. And old students maybe are not to be too happy with remote learning, which looks like it's going to continue at least through the fall of next year. Industries that I think are more resilient are going to be things like the technology companies, which we're much more using these days in all forms. What else? Travel is going to be an interesting situation. I think that the one thing that could happen to certain companies, not only airlines, is that this gives them the impetus to restructure their heavily debt burdens and maybe renegotiate their contracts with labor. And so they're going to do better, but not in the short run. And then there's the issue of chemicals and petrochemicals and the like that will recover. And so I'm not too concerned with them. Healthcare companies, yes, especially with breakthroughs in new medicines. But then again, don't look at me for your stock picking. Choose some people perhaps who spend more time looking at the stock market.